firearms are part of our society. And in BC, many of our community members live, work, and play in the bush. And we know what it means to be responsible gun owners. We know what that means. And more importantly, we know the importance of handling firearms safely. And basically what all these initiatives are trying to do was to replace the existing Firearms Act. Because my background comes from, being around firearms, right from a young age. I do have different perspectives on this based on where I come from. But you know what? We're in BC. And in BC, many of our community members live, work, and play in the bush. And we know what it means to be responsible gun owners. And First Nations as well. We know what that means. And more importantly, we know the importance of handling firearms safely. No, on-reserve rules are not the same as off-reserve rules, meaning provincial crown land. Reserve activity is actually mandated under the federal government, which kind of gives a bit of a gray area when we're talking about these types of laws coming down. And that goes for gun registry. That goes for gun ownership. But for the most part, Aboriginal gun owners who have the right for hunting and whatnot are responsible gun owners and voluntarily participate in the programs that are out there aimed at safe handling and safe transportation and safe, secured locations for their firearms. But it's quite uncertain in terms of the rules. I wasn't quite sure of myself, but I understood based on the teachings I had from my dad that there had to be a way to get rid of unlawful guns and promote the safe use of firearms. There had to be the training and the licensing, and voluntarily we decided to participate. I know many First Nations who do this voluntarily and also go for the training and learning how to not only to handle safely firearms, but also to transport firearms as well safely and secure it. And so, but I don't really see any reference in this bill to anything related to First Nations. And understanding what First Nations will question when it comes to either ownership or transportation or what this bill is about, it would be helpful if First Nations understood, how far this extends, because we do have that line of federal jurisdiction versus provincial jurisdiction. And I'm sure at some point the Aboriginal community was consulted. They must have been. Aboriginal, the right to hunt is an Aboriginal right protected by the Constitution of Canada. But there's a lot of First Nations who live off reserve that will be questioning what this really means. And then, in the same breath, we also have to acknowledge that this is actually related to gang activity. This type of legislation crosses all boundaries. It crosses all jurisdictions in terms. I hope the government is actually can show their consultation with First Nations communities, as outlined in their own UNDRIP bill, that the promise to consult on every bill and every legislation that comes through the House. And firearms, they are connected to Aboriginal rights of title because it's the right to hunt. I missed it. My own experience with firearms goes back to when I was a kid. Even before I was 10 years old, I was taught how to operate a firearm. But like many of my colleagues here, I didn't go to school for it. I didn't go to an RCMP course. I was taught by my dad. And that teaching that he taught me wasn't very fun. It wasn't that really touching father-son moment where we're connecting. It wasn't like that. It was a really serious teaching lesson as a young kid. And I'm sure many people went through the same thing. it had to go through the motions of making sure the firearm was empty, making sure the gun was always pointed up, making sure you always check the safety mechanisms, making sure you always put it away again, look after it, make sure the rust doesn't accumulate. And then after I went through the teaching, I had to do it again and again and again. It was serious business. And my brothers went through the same thing. There was no laughing, there was no joking. And by the way, First Nations love to laugh and joke, but my dad took this really seriously, and my brothers took it really seriously. The point being was basically, look, you're going to have to come out and help us hunt. Sooner or later, you're going to have to learn. And you're going to have to do this safely because none of us want to get shot. And so it wasn't a joke when we were talking about firearms. Today, we still do it, but it's more formalized. You go to a firearms course and you learn all this and more, by the way. You learn more. And in that as well, you start to learn about the regulations and the laws about owning a firearm as well as storing firearms. And now I see the province has picked up part of the jurisdiction in terms of transporting it, and which will actually help RCMP, combat gang violence more effectively. Another experience I had growing up as a young man was taking the formal training to operate a firearm and store it. But it was under RCMP training, of course, but it was for my work. I worked for the Department of Fisheries and Oceans. It was for protection. And it was, it's actually a huge need up in the area where I come from, because you never know. In my territory, there's grizzly bears, black bears, moose, deer, cougars, you name it, we got it. And you just, an angry moose can take you out just as quick as an angry black bear or an angry grizzly bear, which actually happens quite often. Not as often as back in the old days, but pretty traumatic. Point being, I understand there's lawful gun owners out there, firearms owners out there that want to go out and go to the firing range, for instance. Perfectly acceptable. But there's also other uses for the firearms that we have to consider as well. First Nations right to hunt, as well as those that have to work in the bush. Because you just can't predict what's going to happen out there in the bush. The things you face out there are not tame. And I've had the last 45 years plus to learn that firsthand. But it's all based on the idea of owning firearms in a safe manner and a lawful manner. The world we're moving into is actually, it seems that we're requiring more laws just to keep our people safe, our citizens safe here in BC. Yeah, it's, I was talking to myself as basically a civil servant. I work for Department of Fisheries and Oceans, going into streams and rivers, counting salmon, where there was absolutely, you're going to see a grizzly. You are going to see a moose. You are going to see a black bear. So in that respect, civil servants do need some type of fallback or protection just in case. But there's other civil servants that need firearms as well. And this bill is not talking about that. But I think it's important to clarify exactly what we're talking about and exactly what we're not talking about. Because firearms are part of our society. I mean, in some cases, there's some civil servants, especially in today's day and age, with all the stress, all the anxiety, we have civil servants that are going into really sensitive situations. So I could see what they were thinking back in 2016 to try and make it safer, not only for the citizens of BC, but also make it safer for civil servants to go out there and do their job safely and return home safely that night. I hope I've described that clearly, because there's a lot of lawful gun owners that go above and beyond what's mandated by regulation or laws. There's a lot of them.